Hello, this week we're starting up our caregiving lectures this week and our caregiving week. This is going to be broken up into two basic areas. So for this first section, we're going to be talking about formal caregiving. And in the next lecture video, as well as there's an article for you to read on family caregiving and a short video to watch on sort of the impact of informal or family caregiving. That will be the second part of this series. But today I'm going to talk to you about the formal aspects of long-term care, and mostly we'll be focusing on the types and the cost that it has, but this will also be an introduction to the short assignment that you have on finding Mrs. Jones' long-term care resources. So when we think about the importance of long-term or caregiving services, it's a major issue in gerontology in the aging fields in general. There are many, many more older adults, as we understand, who are coming up in aging, and several more than we've had in the past needing caregiving, whether that's formalized or informal. Or by informal, we really mean family friend caregiving. So we have an ever-growing need for these types of services for caregivers. And the long-term care options are plentiful. As you may know, if you've ever been in a long-term care administration class, or you've talked about long-term care in your other classes, or you've been in a nursing home, there are lots of different types of formal long-term care that you can get as an older adult, and some different ways that you can maybe be forced to, or hopefully can, pay for it. All right. So let's start out with the basics. What is long-term care? Essentially, it's just a range of services and supports to meet personal care needs. In this class, we'll be focusing mostly on older adults, but we know that long-term care can also be for people who need short-term rehab, who are recovering from diseases or accidents or other things that put them into a nursing home setting or needing long-term care. But in a sense, long-term care is what it says. It's for a longer period than just a short-term rehab, right? These are people who are likely transitioning into needing care from this period forward. So it's not necessarily, long-term care isn't necessarily medical care like you would think of in the hospital. It can be in some ways, but a lot of it's centered around your ADLs, or your activities of daily living, and your IADLs. So those supportive services are covering both these guys over here, your ADLs, bathing, ambulation, toileting, eating, transfers, dressing, people who need help or more help and can't do those independently, and also some into the IADL category. Long-term care supports might also include services for cooking and cleaning, getting food or shopping, using telephone, transportation, and managing your money or finances. So we also need support services for those. So there's several sources of getting these types of services. You can have them from healthcare agencies, in in-home healthcare. You can get them in a nursing home, hospice setting, residential care communities, adult day service programs, all kinds. And most long-term care is actually provided by informal caregivers at home. However, I know formal caregiving does happen as well in facilities or from organizations that provide those kinds of services. Some home care services could be, that unpaid caregiver who is a family member or friend, a nurse or a home health aide, somebody who comes in, a therapist who comes in the home. Community support services for long-term care can include adult daycare services, transportation services, healthcare agencies that are providing different types of supportive care for ADLs, Meals on Wheels, those types of things. Facility-based programs, of course, are things like nursing homes, be assisted living or board and care homes. And really this graphic here is a good one to see the senior living spectrum. So I'm just going to jump ahead to it. So when we look at all of these different types of care, they vary in how much care and supervision are provided to the older adult, all the way up through hospice care with the most, but they also vary greatly on cost, right? And I'm going to come back to this and explain a couple of these. But let's look at who needs long-term care. So 63% of the people in need of long-term care services are older adults. That's why long-term care is usually an aging game. And this is growing. In fact, about 70% of people turning 65 can expect to use some form of long-term care services during their lives. It doesn't mean that 70% of people over 65 will be in a nursing home, not at all. It just means that percentage is far lower. It just means that they will use some form of long-term care services. Could be Meals on Wheels, could be transportation services, or it could be something like a residential nursing home. So there are a number of different factors for why you might need long-term caregiving. That's formal. So of course, a lot of it is the age. The older you are, the more likely you are to need long-term care. For gender, it's actually for women, we're more likely to need it because we do have that extended life expectancy. And the longer that we live, the longer that we'll live with potential disabilities or loss of function increases. So of course, those people with increased health problems or increased disability, worsening health, they're certainly going to be the bigger users of long-term care services. About 8% of people ages 40 to 50 have a disability that could require long-term care services. About 69% of people 90 or more have a disability that would qualify them for long-term care services. Definitely your health status, right? So that's something. And also if you your living arrangements matter. So if you're alone, you're more likely to need paid care than if you're married, or living with a partner, right? Or have family. So if you're single, widowed, living alone, any of those are a combination of you're more likely to need long-term care, formal long-term care services, because you don't have anybody informal to help you with that. Back to the senior living spectrum here, I just wanted to give you a sense of how many types of formalized caregiving are available, or paid caregiving are available across the senior living spectrum. It's quite a bit, all the way again from temporary or living at home still over on this side of the graph, to needing much more supervision and level of care and living in a facility on this side of the graph in a nursing home or hospice care. And you'll see in cost, we have quite a bit of difference as well. Of course, the cost in healthcare dollars or service dollars is lower if you're in home and getting much more, a few select support services have independent living. CCRCs, or continuing care retirement communities like Meadowlark Hills that we have here in Manhattan. That is actually a wide spectrum of cost, but can be very costly because it includes both entrance fees and monthly fees, and it could increase depending on your level of care over time. Retirement communities, we have respite care in there, so temporary nursing care for, informal caregivers who need respite from that. So you could go into the nursing home for, 20 days, 14 days, so that your caregiver can get a break. Assisted living, of course, is you might need some help with some ADLs or some IADLs, but essentially you're much more independent than dementia, Alzheimer's care, nursing home care, and certainly in hospice. So there's all kinds. And all of these too represent job opportunities, places of care, right, to provide this kind of caregiving. So let's look at some of these categories, and we'll talk about some of the issues that are inherent in each of these. So when you think about long-term care in your home or getting formal caregiving, formal paid caregiving in your home, there are some considerations. So what's the condition of your home? Is it a very old home? Does it have a lot of stairs? Can you age in place or live in that place with your current conditions, or can some adaptations be made or modifications possible? Is there an availability of in-home care in your area? A lot of people who are in rural areas or who can't afford this kind of care, if it's not subsidized in some way by another support, this is not an option, right? There are different age-friendly community resources that you could have, including things like a Meals on Wheels. We have several of these things: home-delivered meals, senior centers for socialization, adult daycare centers for potentially those who need a little more care during the day but could have supervision or are okay overnight. Or if you can afford in-home care during the night and you go to a cheaper adult daycare center during the day, that might be a split cost there. So there's a lot of support services that are needed in order to support older adults in home. And some might need a few of these, some might need more. And again, as you think about that level of care needed, as we ramp it over to this side and you need more and more care, you're going to need more and more of these support services. So when we think about long-term care in your new home, which is moving into a new home or a new dwelling and receiving care there. So this is the continuing care retirement community or retirement community kind of model, where you have one single campus that has all the needs to be met across the continuum of care, right? So this is like Meadowlark. You can come in, you can live in a condo or duplex kind of situation with your partner. You can live in an apartment independently. You can get some assisted care, formal support for a few IADLs or ADLs, all the way up through nursing care and needing health care, right, in a nursing home setting. So in one campus, you have all of these. And at some point, you decide, I'm not going to live at home anymore. I'm either going to sell it or I'm going to, let the kids have it or however it is, and I'm going to move into this new community and it will cover me through the end of life. So it spans a lot. So typically CCRCs are expensive endeavors. You may have heard this from folks at the Meadowlark Hills. Sorry, I had a brain fart there. The Meadowlark Hills. But if we zoom in on this, which I'd like to, and see some of these costs. So they have typically an entrance fee that's non-refundable, which is sizable, and then monthly rent or a monthly fee that you pay. And some of them will add on additional, fees for extra services. So when we there is a new blog here for the New York Times that I would encourage you to go to if you would like to see more about the costs of CCRCs. But they basically break down CCRCs into 3 different categories, and these are the most typical. The Type A contract, where you pay a hefty, a decent entrance fee, and then you pay the same monthly fee from the time you get in there to the time you either decide to leave or you pass away. And that is, the same, no matter the price for, is the same across assisted living or nursing home care, the monthly fee. But you do pay, a decent entrance fee. So this is an example of a Type A contract in Chesterfield, Missouri, which again is a fairly low cost of living environment. So think about these monthly fees or these entrance fees as moderate. And when we look at something like a Type B contract, this is where you come in and you have a different entrance fee depending on which level you come in at, just like the other one. But your monthly fee also changes as you need more care. So that is something to think about when you're going into thinking about formalized care. It gets more expensive as a monthly fee. And some of these have really hefty entrance fees. I mean, when you look at this, $210,000 for a 1-bedroom apartment, and the monthly fee then is $1,900. So, you're paying a decent amount of money to get in because they know that that's going to cover a lot of the costs of the social services that they provide, the care that they provide, the meal, all that stuff, meals, everything that you have. It's just that when you become more expensive to them in this type B contract, they're going to charge you more. There's also a type C, which isn't very common, which is sort of a pay market value. So you pay your entrance fee when you come in, and as you need stepped up care, you pay that market value instead of a pre-existing or predetermined value. When your care goes up, you just pay whatever they're charging at the current moment. Okay, so those are some of the costs of a CCRC and a description of it. Let's transition a little bit into costs in general of assisted living. So this is a chart here of the U.S. So when you look at it, it's the median monthly cost by state. So your lower costs are going to be the yellows to the oranges, the middle costs, and the reds are where it's the high cost for a month per month for assisted living. So these are averages, right, for the state. So we look at some of these states that are in the red, so Maine and some of the Northeast. Interestingly, Wisconsin, we have Washington and Alaska that are on the higher end of monthly fee, how much it costs you per month to be in assisted living. When we look at Kansas, we have about that didn't shake out quite nice, but it's about a $3,500 fee. So, we're getting closer to that red color in the dark orange, but there's some states that are much cheaper, including the Utahs, the North Dakotas, Oklahoma, just to the south of us in Kansas. So there's some cheaper states, but I'll take you to look in. And I hope that this is hitting home that paying $3,500 per month is a decent amount when you think about just the rent and the own amount of money that you pay to subsist in your world. $3,500 a month is a decent amount to be paying out. So let's look at some of the breakdowns in costs by different type. So if we're talking about assisted living versus nursing home living and then home health care living, these are some national averages. So per year for a home health aide in-home, you're spending about $50,000 nationally to get care in your home, right? So that likely isn't 24-hour care. Assisted living facility, you're paying about $51 grand a year to live in a one-bedroom unit. And for nursing home care, which is much better covered by some of the insurances that we have, including Medicaid, you have, for a semi-private room, $85,000 a year and $97,000 a year for a private room. These are national averages. Let's look at Kansas. So Kansas not far off for the home health aide and the one-bedroom units and assisted living of the national averages. A little bit cheaper, actually, when we look at long-term care costs per average, on average in Kansas per year. But still, the bottom line being this is an expensive endeavor, and you can see why perhaps formal caregiving is the less common option, because informal caregiving is quote unquote free up front because you don't pay your daughter to take care of you, but there are costs that are involved in that, which we'll talk about, right? Hefty indirect costs for informal caregivers. All right. So how do you pay for formal care? What are the types, and this is a very broad sweep here, but what are the types of ways that we pay for formal caregiving? We have federal sources, right? So there's a possibility for Medicare to pay for a small amount of it if it's a short-term stay, long-term care. Your VA benefits, if you're a veteran, may pay for some of your long-term care. And the Older Americans Act is a federal act which allows for money to come into the area agencies on aging and other types of aging services that provide some of those important services for especially in-home care. Your state, really, Medicaid is a huge payer here, huge payer for long-term care services. They're going to be the nursing home payer for the most part. They also pay for, some states pay for in-home care services that you might have a home health care aide. They will pay for that, and there are other programs statewide or that vary by state, like the PACE program, which it provides in-home care as well in a limited kind of services basis. There are also local and community ways that you are paying for it or can pay for it. The Area Agency on Aging, which is technically funded federally, but it provides all of these local community services like your Meals on Wheels programs, et cetera, come through Area Agency on Aging. There's other local supports and programs that can be through churches or nonprofit organizations or have been started by individuals, et cetera, that help, deliver or transport or provide some in-home care. But your local and community sources aren't going to do you good when you need assisted living. Well, maybe assisted living if you're getting services at your assisted living facility that aren't paid for by that facility. But if you're getting nursing home care, then you're transitioning into Medicaid primarily, or your own assets, which is the last one, private pay, right? So you're either paying out of pocket, which remember that long-term care in Kansas might cost you $66,000 a year. So whatever isn't paid for by Medicaid, if you do not qualify for Medicaid yet, which we will talk about, right? Because this is a means-based insurance, not an older age insurance like Medicare and Medicaid. You have to have income qualifications for. And then the rest you're paying out of pocket, and perhaps you might have bought long-term care insurance to pay for this, which, I'm usually encourage students to think hard about when you get a job and they go through the benefits spiel from HR, to think really hard about long-term care insurance, because as we learn in this, it costs quite a bit, and having some money towards long-term care insurance can help save you from having to do things like spending down your assets for Medicaid. So if you've never heard of spending down your assets, you lived in a nice bubble, but I'm going to burst it now. Or essentially becoming poor. So we're talking about formalized long-term care services here. If you have your own assets, right? So you own a home, you own cars, you have savings, you have investments, you have assets, then monetary assets. And in order to qualify for Medicaid to be able to pay for your long-term care, they require you to first spend down your own assets, which it has, it's a healthcare expenditure. You use your own assets, although a small portion are protected, including some of your spouse. If you have a spouse who's not in long-term care, they get at least, they can get half or maybe up to more of that, depending on, how you finagle things. But you have to spend down your own assets to qualify for Medicaid on healthcare first. So that might include, that big hefty fee in front of the CCRC. You spend your own assets on that and some of the monthly until maybe you need nursing home care, and then Medicaid can jump in if you have spent enough of your own assets. So let's talk about that in this schematic, what an example of spending down your assets might be. So if you are a couple and you have $100,000 in assets, and you, the male, are going into needing long-term care services to pay for it, half of your assets can be transferred to your spouse, and they can keep up to that. And although there's a maximum amount allowed, so if you have, $1 million in assets, they can't keep $500,000 of that. Although if you have $1 million in assets, you're probably finding unique ways to shelter that. from the feds. But anyway, so that leaves $50,000 of your assets left for you, and these have to be spent down to $2,000 in this money scenario in order to pay it for Medicaid to kick in and pay for you. So, this is a big deal. So essentially you have to become poor, use your own money before Medicaid will use its money. Which, begs the question, should we make people use their money for formal care, right? So if you're going into a nursing home, you don't have the informal care option, and you have a lot of assets left, should you have to spend them on your own care before the government kicks in and spends theirs, up to a certain amount? Is that a fair deal, right? So this is something that might be a good thing, right? So spending your own money on it, that does bring up questions about, well, I wanted to give this to family, give this to here and there. So some people do divestment planning to protect their assets from spending down. They might transfer assets to a business, a spouse, or another trust. Or they might buy healthcare insurance for children in advance, things like that, or cut their spouse loose in a sense so that they can give them all of their assets and be able to then, have them live with the assets and not have to spend them. Okay, so that's a big deal, right, when we talk about formalized care and Medicaid kicking in, is that, you have to deal with this spending your own money first. Okay. So that brings